Absolutely. I'll try to be brief because there are many in the audience with just an incredible wealth of expertise and decades worth of knowledge about Tunisia, and it would be wonderful to have some Q&A. It's a real honor to speak alongside Saeed Ben Arabia and Abdelrazak Kilani. I can't think of a better expert on Tunisia's judiciary than Saeed, and I highly encourage everybody in the audience to read ICJ's work if they haven't done so already, to understand all the nitty-gritty details about the ins and outs of Tunisia's judiciary. I also think it might be worth noting, just in case some in the audience aren't aware, Abdelrazak Kilani himself, who's the former head of Tunisia's Bar Association, a recipient of the Paris Bar Association's Human Rights Award for his efforts to defend human rights during Tunisia's 2011 revolution. He himself is under bogus investigations, summons from Tunisia's military courts, even though he's a civilian, after having attended the January 14th demonstration in Tunis, commemorating the 2011 revolution, and after simply trying to visit his client, one of his clients, Noureddin Bihiri, who is vice president of NAFTA, and who was violently abducted from his home on December 31st and has been held without any arrest warrant, any formal charges, no access to due process or his attorneys since then. So we're speaking in a very fraught context. I also think it's worth noting that there are many in Tunisia who have been so dissatisfied with the past 10 years and also so touched by various conspiracy theories, some of which are decades old and involve decades old ideological pathologies about so-called Islamists in Tunisia. Some who would denounce us, these three independent experts speaking with you here tonight, simply because Radwan is a member of Ennahda, or simply because Abdelrazak Kilani, an independent lawyer with a storied human rights history, is defending a member of Ennahda. We're in a very fraught context. Like Radwan said, I've been writing on Tunisia for 11 years. I was in Tunis in July and August, and I went back in January and interviewed, between those two recent trips, over 100 different Tunisians across the ideological spectrum. And I noticed a real, almost evangelical enthusiasm for Kais Saied when he first came to power in the summer. Despite the fact that he had immediately shuttered parliament, closed it unconstitutionally, putting military tanks at the gates, despite the fact that he had, for months, referred to his opponents with such demonizing language as microbes, traitors, even calling his opponents demons and viruses, there was a lot of confidence that Kais Saied, as an uncorrupted former law professor, a seemingly clean, upright man, not a sort of money-grubbing, golden toilet-loving autocrat to be, would somehow swoop in and rectify the manifold failures of Tunisia's kind of paralytically inept, in some ways, parliaments that had come before throughout the transition, and fix the economic grievances that so many Tunisians cared about. I spoke with one woman, I chronicled this experience in a long, deep dive into the state of Tunisia's opposition that I published last week with Dawn, which you guys can read if any of you are interested. I spoke with one woman in a very shabby, popular neighborhood of the capital, Tunis, who had even said to me, really tragically, touchingly in the summer, she said, I believe that Kais Saied is going to be the person to finally pull these terrible, brutal police officers off my son's backs, even though he'd said and done nothing in his 2 years in office to make her think that he was going to undertake these important reforms to the security sector and the economy. It was interesting, though, when I went back to Tunis last month and interviewed a few dozen Tunisians, including some who had really expressed a lot of support in the summer, like this woman. The edge of their enthusiasm had seemed to be taken off. Their enthusiasm was a lot more muted. They seemed a bit confused. A lot of them said, well, if it's a binary choice between just what came before and him, I don't know. I still don't like what came before. I don't trust those people. I don't really know if there's a good alternative, but there's no clarity. Nothing's clear. I'm just amazed that he hasn't done more right now. Nothing changes. These sorts of messages were coming through. We've certainly seen, as the two speakers who went before me emphasized, just a systematic assault on everything that Tunisia's revolution and all of the painstaking efforts that came out of it built from Kais Saied since July 25th. He closed parliament with military tanks. He suspended Tunisia's constitution. He tried to set himself up as the sole prosecutor. There are lots of well-sourced reports of him trying to do just completely absurd things, like install military governors of every governorate in Tunisia, or simply fire all the governors. He's continued to refer to his opponents as traitors, microbes, demons, and viruses. Immediately upon seizing power in his presidential coup of July 25th, he imposed sweeping travel bans on entire swaths of Tunisian society, like business people, and like every single elected parliamentarian, regardless of their political party, even members of parties that supported him since 2011. It's just really extraordinary. He's evinced almost a talent for isolating potential allies. He has shown zero interest in dialoguing with anyone, including Tunisia's very strong labor union, UGTT, which is really make or break for him, could be at least. Although he's engaged in some conversation with them recently, he's shown no inclination to do actual dialogue with them, and they were quite positive about him in the beginning. Same with parties that were positive about him, like Harakat al-Shab or Atayar. So he's lost a lot of goodwill in Tunisia's amongst Tunisia's political parties and parts of its civil society. Basically, every political party in the country now, with the exception of a small Nasserist party called Harakat al-Shab and very, very tiny party called Watar, extraordinarily marginal, now refers to the events of July 25th as a coup. And that's an extremely important rhetorical shift, because whether or not July 25th constituted a coup was a matter of intense debate amongst Tunisians and human rights defenders and democracy fighters immediately after his actions on July 25th. So that's very important. However, as I detailed in this piece published last week, Tunisia's opposition remains weak and incredibly fragmented. I outlined three main groups that the opposition falls into. First, citizens against the coup, and the dominant parties in Tunisia's former, now frozen parliament, Ennahda, Qalb Tunis, and Karama, are supporting the quickest path back to some sort of constitutionality in Tunisia. They're supporting a plan that would bring back the elected parliament for even a very short period of time, maybe even weeks or days, just so that parliament, which is the constitutional authority vested with this power, could organize new elections and you could have fresh, free, and fair elections. That's the exit ramp that would most swiftly restore Tunisia to some form of constitutionalism. But not all the opposition is behind it. The second group of opposition, I call them the both ands. They're both against Kais, against what they're now referring to as his coup, but they're also against the 10 years of inept rule that came before, and they're especially against Ennahda. So there's a kind of false equivalence that I would argue that they're engaging in, where, in a single breath, they're against Kais, who's the first order problem, but they're also expressing a lot of opposition to Ennahda and what came before, which I think, given where Tunisia sits right now, is by far and away a second order problem. So they don't want to work with citizens against the coup, the first group, because they see it as too close to Ennahda, etc. The third group, I would basically call them the ones who are still waiting for Kais's phone call. They would probably endorse him or even ally with him if he would actually pick up the phone and engage him in a way that he hasn't yet. And I put the labor union in there, UGTT, and a number of other civil society groups, sadly, including the ones who mediated Tunisia's 2015 Nobel Peace Prize winning quartet dialogue. Stunningly, given the situation that you've all heard about tonight, the international community, i.e. Western democracies, have been mystifyingly credulous in their responses to Sayed. On December 13th, Kais Saied announced a roadmap. I'm problematizing it with quotation marks here because I don't think it merits the term roadmap. If it's a roadmap to anything, it's a roadmap to a consolidated dictatorship in Tunisia, because the entire thing exists outside any framework of rule of law or constitutionalism, and would impose a very unfree and unfair plebiscite on the country that would push forward an autocratic vision that he has of Tunisia's constitution and political system. But when he made this announcement on December 13th, the US State Department released a statement that, like I said, was just, mystifyingly positive almost. It sounded, they were just incredibly relieved that Sayed had come up with any sort of roadmap whatsoever, whether or not it was a roadmap towards consolidating his own dictatorship in Tunisia. We heard over the past week a flurry of statements, including from the Senate Foreign Relations Committee, the House Foreign Relations Committee, the US State Department, the United Nations, various European Union governments of concern. Once they realized that Sayed was shutting down the High Judicial Council, which is the last remaining safeguard of any form of judicial independence in the country. I think it's a bit too little too late, but at least you finally heard some Western governments appearing to wake up to the absolute gravity of what's at stake here. However, I think Western governments' interests in working with Kais Saied in the short-term pursuit of seeming stabilization are very strong. And if he throws them any kind of a bone here, maybe even if he doesn't, they're likely to move forward with an IMF package and continued support. It would be absolutely, I think, indefensible in the current situation for things like the MCC package of aid, which is a package of aid from the United States earmarked for democracies, to be unpaused in this situation. Kais Saied, I think, is making it very difficult for anyone not to understand that Tunisia is now in a dictatorship. But we see Western governments, I think, still very unclear about their position. And I'll conclude with this. This is a man who has been, despite the fact that he was a constitutional lawyer, fixated on presidentialism for a long time. I've interviewed former colleagues and students of his who have told me that, he taught one class for 20 years and he basically never changed the syllabus. His syllabus for intro to constitutional law came from professors that he had in the 1960s. And it also evinced a real fixation on a misunderstanding of American presidentialism. He had basically 3/4 of the course, about presidentialism, and a very, very small unit on parliamentarism. He sees himself messianically as a savior figure. And he has been systematically unraveling every piece of institutional democratic fabric that it took a once in a lifetime, maybe once in a century or more than one century's revolution, and years of laborious, difficult, painstaking labor and inclusive dialogue after the revolution to build. If Kais Saied disappeared today, it would still take years to re-knit what he has unraveled. So Tunisia is in a very dark place. I think the question right now is not if Tunisia is a dictatorship, because it technically has been since July 25th, tragically, because there's been one man ruling unchecked by a unilateral personal decrees. The question instead, in my view, is whether Kais Saied can consolidate his dictatorship. And the answer lies in Tunisia's opposition. Can it unite? And in the international community, can they evaluate the risks and respond? Thank you.